Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is July 20th, year 2025. The time, 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome, one and all. Today, I'll be talking about Dr. Thomas Noguchi and the politics of death. Yes, indeed, death, murder, killing, serial, mass murder. These are all highly politicized acts to varying degrees, as I will demonstrate today. And I will do so while reviewing the personal life, as well as the professional career of Thomas Noguchi, medical doctor. Now, he is a post-war, that is after 1945. I think he came to the U.S. sometime in the 1950s when immigration started to loosen up for Asians, Japanese in specific, after World War II. And the barriers were not lifted for all Asians until 1965. Right, from a period of 1924 through 1965, all immigration from the Asian part of the world was halted by an act of Congress. It's called the Oriental Exclusion Act, 1924. There was an earlier one that was imposed more specifically on Chinese. This is 1882. And I'm giving you a little bit of the historical background to account for why Dr. Noguchi met with a great deal of professional resistance from the very beginning of his arrival in the United States of America as a Shin Imin, which in Japanese means Shin New. Imin is immigrant, a new immigrant. That is a post-war immigrant, as opposed to pre-war immigrants, such as my family, that were coming to the United States probably as early as the 1870s. I think my people themselves arrived in the Hawaiian Islands, which was a territory of the U.S., a colony of the U.S. I think my people arrived around the 1890s or so. So my grandparents got in under this wave of labor recruitment to the plantation economy of Hawaii, agricultural economy. And I mentioned that also is because Dr. Noguchi represents also a more cosmopolitan wave of post-war immigrants. Not only was he highly educated, including the medical degree at Nippon Medical College in Tokyo, but he was a second-generation doctor. His father was a medical doctor as well. And I mention this is because there seemed to be sort of a misunderstanding or underappreciation of the different groups within this larger category that got Dr. Noguchi into some trouble, right? For one, as I've already alluded to, he was getting problems from the dominant society who didn't even want him hired at the LA County Coroner office, let alone become the Chief Medical Examiner and Coroner. I think this happened in 65, I think he was. He was hired in 61, I believe. And he was appointed to the top spot I believe, in 1965. But the point is that he met a great deal of professional as well as personal resistance because of a lot of the animosity that his superiors or politicians, elected officials, as well as the general population, the hostility they had towards Japanese in general, whether they were Americans, that is American citizens, or whether they were new immigrants like Dr. Noguchi, right? We're talking about the in his case, the late 50s, early 60s, World War II ended in 1945, and you also had large numbers of Japanese Americans, these are U.S. citizens of Japanese backgrounds, who were returning to the Los Angeles area in large numbers after being sent to concentration camps around the country in the U.S. Excuse me. Most of you know the story by now, so I don't have to repeat it. And so Noguchi, Dr. Noguchi, was caught in this wave here. So I wanted to talk about, in addition to Dr. Noguchi's specific situation, and by the way, the pic that illustrates this is sort of an inside visual joke for people who know, but I illustrated this talk with a pic of a Canadian actor, excuse me, Robert Ito. And Robert Ito, was the second in command. He was the sidekick to Jack Klugman in the medical drama Quincy M.E., which ran on the network. I don't know which one it was. I think it might have been CBS. I'm not sure. This is when the networks were still around. It ran for several years, starting in the 70s. Excuse me. Let me wet my whistle here. I haven't spoken all day, so my throat's a little dry. Let me take this time to express my appreciation, my thanks, my gratitude to the patrons who support this show. You allowed me to purchase, fresh off the press, this book by a scholar by the name of An Soon Choi. It's called LA Coroner, Thomas Noguchi, Death in Hollywood, right? So far as I know, it's the first and only full-length biography of Dr. Noguchi. Unfortunately, it lacks in many, many critical areas, which I won't spend a lot of time on it. She gave it a try. I'll give her credit for that. I think I read an article by her years and years ago. And of course, I've written extensively prior to that about people like Thomas Noguchi and my own scholarship. For example, in Monitored Peril, this is about Asian Americans on television. Servitors of Empire, this is about the bad guys of Asian America. And that's one of the problems I have with the books like this, is that each one of these people that are trotted out are kind of artificially put out there as heroic by nature because of the struggles that they underwent. And I call bullshit on that in this book, right? It's called Servitors of Empire. And it's for that reason that I've been ostracized from the field that I helped pioneer, so-called Asian American studies. And again, that's one of the reasons why I refer to myself as a yellow person, not Asian American, because that term has been hijacked. Just like Latino, Latinx, Latina, or African American, all that's been hijacked by people in the intelligence world and Nepo babies who come from the intelligence world, who have infiltrated these areas. So I'm just telling you this because I come from the old school, right? This is for newbies who don't know the backstory here. And then, of course, I wrote about the necessity of having a yellow vision of owned, operated, distributed, and acted and written and produced independent media by yellow people. This is called countervisions. So the point is, not just to promote myself, but just to show that I've given this topic a great deal of thought, and I'm not new to it. Now, in addition to this, I have a whole storehouse of study, years and years of study on what I pioneered at the University of California, Davis, what I pioneered as what might be called New World Order studies. And it goes by any number of names: the secret state, the hidden state, the uber state, blah, blah, blah. New World Order study, that's kind of a cliche by now, but this is what I was teaching pedagogically at the university level years ago, going back to 2005. And part of this is where I'm going with it. And part of this innovation in rejecting feminism, academic feminism in particular, and rejecting academic Marxism, which is the dominant model of social sciences, the humanities, even today. And then later, what became called critical race theory, I rejected that as well, because that's been co-opted, that's been hijacked. And instead, I talked about New World Order studies, and central to that is a study, a systematic study of what today has become called true crime. So I'm one of the pioneers of this in the academic world. But as you know, that field has been flooded as well. And those of you who are regular listeners to my channel, you're tired of hearing me talk about the pop-up pundits. So I won't. Right. And I'm already getting comments saying, oh gosh, I bet he's going to mention Dr. Todd Grandy again. I won't. I promise you. I'm just trying to establish my bona fides here. Okay. Because it's important not to me, not to glorify Professor Hamamoto, but it's important to you. Because through this systematic study, we are going to undermine the infrastructure, the superstructure, the ideological, that is the ideas, the thoughts, the behaviors. That's what I mean by superstructure. We're going to undermine the superstructure of this behemoth, for lack of, to mix metaphors, this super state that oppresses us. And one of the means of oppressing us is to commit killings, murders, all the way from satanic ritualized murder to assassinations right in front of the public, to further enslave our minds. The word trauma, again, it's been co-opted, to traumatize the public time after time, to inure us to it, to immunize us to it, to normalize this way of doing politics. Instead of the ballot, we get the bullet, right? So there is a method, there's a goal to my method and my madness here, right? And I will say that, and no victory is ever complete, and no victory is ever won totally and forever. We're human beings. We live in a perfect world, in a society. I hope we're old enough, mature enough to realize that fact. And evil always lurks on the margins. Right now, it's in the foreground. It's in the center, front row and center, but it is being pushed to the margins. That's the good news. And how is it being done? It's being done through this type of work that you and me, we're doing right now, the public, and specialized investigators such as myself. And not just myself, there's other people. I've named any number of contributors, and I'll talk more about some of my favorite authors today. You can take note of them, buy these books from the retailer that ate the world, study up on it yourself. And I'll have to say, I cannot recommend this book, just like I could not last week recommend the book by Harold Bloom, When Night Falls. It's about the University of Idaho killings. 4 undergraduates slaughtered because he takes literary license to what should be more of a forensic, I believe, investigation, not criminalistics forensic. There should be some of that, of course, obviously, but more of a social, cultural, historical inquiry into what happened instead of his Howard Blum using his literary imagination and trying to get into the heads of the different people who were involved in this really crazy, heinous crime, which is still breaking. It's all over the place. And there's all these pop-up pundits who are commenting on it. And by the way, while I'm thanking my Patreons, I'm getting new supporters all the time. Welcome to the show, or welcome to the Patreon site. You're going to be richly rewarded. You allowed me, because of your support, to buy this book. I just got it this week. I've been reading like, you know what, all this week. I've just been very, very deeply absorbed in all the material that I've been gathering lately. And I'm going to give a full-blown talk on the situation at the University of Idaho. I have some observations and some hypotheses that I will share with you before any other audience. I'll be writing about this, but by the time my work comes out, you will have heard what my thoughts are. Okay. And so in the second major book that's come out after Bloom, that just dropped this week, and I pre-ordered it thanks to my Patreon people here. It's called The Idaho Four, An American Tragedy. It's by James Patterson. He's a novelist. I confess I know who he is, but I haven't read any of his fiction. And Vicky Ward, who I have read, and you probably have read her too, even though you might not know her byline. And she's all over YouTube. You can check out her work. But she is a British journalist. She's a real journalist. She's not one of these YouTubers or these retooled comedians like Bill Maher or Jimmy Dore, whoever else these people are who are now they're presenting themselves as serious thinkers, but they're comedians. They're in it for the laughs. So she's the real deal. I'm not saying she's a perfect journalist. She's not accounting for a lot of stuff. I mean, she's not perfect. Nobody is. I'm not, right? But she's one of the co-authors of this book. I just started reading it. This also does sort of a Bloom type exercise in literary license or literary conceit, but I haven't read the book. And I'll report back to you later once I do and give you my take. I also got this book. This has been out a few years. This is by one of my favorite true crime writers. He didn't start that way. His name's Dominic Dunn. You've heard me name check him any number of times, but I don't think I've done a complete talk on Dominic Dunn himself, because this is the first that I know of biography on a very important character, contemporary, forget true crime. I mean, he's written true crime, but I think he's an important writer, period. Just like Truman Capote wrote In Cold Blood, which Howard Bloom tries to be, right? He tries to be a Truman Capote because that was a breakthrough book. One of a kind. And Norman Mailer tried it also with Executioner's Song, trying to do a true crime but make it literary. But Dominic Dunn did some old-fashioned reporting, including going to all the courtroom trials, sitting there, especially the OJ trial, which I followed day by day by day. But he was there in the courtroom reporting every day. Anyway, that's just a little bit of the highlights. So I'll be doing, this is just coming attractions. I'm doing this up front because I tend to run long in these talks, and I forget to tell you what's coming up for future shows. I might do this as soon as this Sunday, as I'm prepping for the University of Idaho slayings up there. Incredible. There's some really interesting information. I won't spoil it for you. I'll spring some surprises on you. So most of you know, going back to Thomas Noguchi, most of you know that he rose to notoriety. He wasn't famous yet, but he rose to notoriety when it became known that he was the principal surgeon or medical doctor who did the autopsy on Marilyn Monroe. And she was declared he wasn't chief coroner at the time. He worked in the coroner's office. I think he'd been there about a year, right? He finally got a job. He had a hard time getting a job in the civil service. Right? He did all kinds of internships, even with his medical license, because no one wanted to hire him. And he went to all these out of the way places in order to pay his dues and work his way into it. So when the Marilyn Monroe case drops in his lap, and she was world famous, she was very well known in Japan, certainly. We're talking about the post-war period. And I should also tell you that Thomas Noguchi grew up in Yokosuka, Japan, which is south of Tokyo. It's in Kanagawa prefecture, which, by the way, it's a bay, and that's also where Admiral Perry showed up with the black ships, the steamships, to quote unquote open up Japan to the foreign trade. It's called gunboat diplomacy. Not much has changed, except now we're doing interplanetary gunboat diplomacy with maybe directed energy weapons. The point is that he had exposure to America. And I think that's maybe why he said, hey, I'm going to go to the land of opportunity. And then when he got there, he realized he was a Jap. He had inherited this whole legacy of anti-Oriental ideology and laws. But he didn't realize, I don't think he ever fully realized that throughout his entire life in the United States of America. And that got him into trouble. Didn't want to admit it to himself. All right. So getting back to him, to Dr. Noguchi, I should tell you, for especially younger viewers, that this is the pre-internet days. All we had, and I was there, I was a kid when this was going on, but I was old enough to be able to read the newspaper. My family was a very newspaper magazine literate household. Thank goodness my dad, my mother, they subscribed to the Los Angeles Times. We got 7 days a week. We got the Life magazine, Reader's Digest, you name it. I mean, a lot of working class, middle class households had that level of literacy. We weren't alone in that, but we did not have the internet. And of course, television was fairly new. I still remember when we got our first television. So this is how I was apprehending this figure, Thomas Noguchi. And I grew up in the same Los Angeles milieu, social, cultural, legal, juridical, political milieu as Noguchi. And so did my father. Now, my father, my mother, they're both second generation Americans. They're called Nisei. Ni is two, sei is generation. So they knew the score. They also grew up in Hawaii. They were colonized. They were colonial subjects, and they moved to the mainland here, in Los Angeles, right? And then later Orange County. So they knew the score. They had been socialized into being second-class citizens, right? And I know for young people, it's very difficult for you to wrap your mind around this because you grew up in an era when Japan was cool. I mean, there's so many tourists in Japan now running around doing cosplay, these weeaboos, that's what they call them, or weebs, just running around because the yen is low and the dollar's high. And some of these places like Kyoto and Tokyo, which is huge, they're saying, man, we got to cut down on the tourism. It's getting ridiculous. And they're going there because of anime and manga and cosplay and all that stuff. But I'm telling you, I was growing up in a world, and so was Noguchi, growing up in a world where we were like one step above dogs socially and politically. All right. And that includes living accommodation. There was still segregation, residential segregation in Los Angeles. Now, Noguchi was able to get out of the Little Tokyo area. Little Tokyo, Los Angeles is right next to City Hall. It's right there. When you saw the rioters, all the DACA rioters, I mean, these guys are not even citizens and they're rioting. It show and these DACA, right? These are the children that were brought in by illegal immigrants who are now of age. They're taking over, man. And they're not shy about it. They're at the University of California. They have a multi-million dollar building dedicated to them at UC Davis. They have academic departments, counseling, testing, professional services that are bringing them into the system because they need them for the New World Order system as administrators. Right? They're the bureaucrats. As a friend of mine who happens to be Latino, by the way, that's what he refers to because he's seeing the same thing going on. But this was not Los Angeles in the late 50s and the 60s. So for Dr. Noguchi to be dissecting the body of a world famous sex symbol, a white woman, that was just too much to bear for a lot of the people in the county, even though he's a medical doctor. Because when you peel away the skin, you'll see that you just see it, the human body and the organs, right? All the other stuff are external, they're superficial, let's say, markers of your racial, your ethnicity, your agenda, by the way. Okay. So that's when he first came to attention, and that's when he came to the attention of me as a little boy, because we didn't have people in those types of positions, we being yellow people, especially Japanese. And we were much more fragmented there. There were no Chinese who were supporting Dr. Noguchi. There were no Koreans supporting Dr. Noguchi. People like Ansun Choi weren't even in the country yet. Her people probably came after 1965 when those barriers were lifted by an act of Congress. They said, okay, we need some more medical doctors and intellectual coolie labor and mathematicians to restock all the old people, the old Nazis that died. We're going to get them from China now and from India. Right? We had our Operation Paperclip, you know that. I call this post 1965 wave because they were dying out by then. I call this Operation Rice Paperclip. So that's her cohort. So we're worlds apart. Even though she ostensibly is in quote unquote Asian American studies, she's only grappling at the very, very superficial information that's been created out of this subdiscipline called so-called Asian American studies, right? And that's how she's going to get over in American academia, right? I was in an Asian American studies program, but I didn't feel myself being bound by this little world that was created for me, this little ghetto, professional ghetto that I was being slotted into. And I'm telling you this is because that's what happened to Dr. Noguchi. That's what they wanted him to be. They wanted him to be a lab monkey, a pathologist who worked on the corner, just doing his little test tube experiments in his lab jacket. But he said, no, remember, he's a second generation doctor. He comes from a family of high accomplishment in the home country. So he's not used to subordination. He's not used to second class treatment that way. And that's how he rolled. And a lot, by the way, more new age or new wave immigrants, people like, South Asians in particular, or high level Chinese, they go right to the top because they are lateral transfers from India or from Hong Kong or Singapore. Or in the case, sometimes it's straight from Beijing, they come right into the American side. So they don't know this struggle. They haven't lived it. I'm not saying that they should or have to. They should have some appreciation of it, right? because it was the struggle of my grandparents' generation, first generation, and my parents' generation who pushed forward professionally and through the society. Okay, before I digress too far into that, I should also say that the main point beyond all this is for you to understand first and foremost that the position of coroner is a political position. It's a political role, right? You think it's just a guy in a lab coat off in the corner in antiseptic conditions doing his job. Yeah, that's part of the gig, but that's only part of it. The other part is the politics of it. I'm not just talking about departmental politics. Anybody who's had a job, you know about backstabbing and gossip and who's up and who's down and all the rumors about firing and layoff. Okay, that's office politics. I'm talking about I'm talking about national politics and by extension world politics. For example, if you were to declare the death of Marilyn Monroe to be homicide or well, she was declared a suicide. I don't know if I already stated that. She was declared by the guy that was in charge at the time a suicide. But let's say you had something less clear cut than that. And by the way, you know this, there's been tons of books questioning that conclusion that it was a suicide. I'm assuming that you have some knowledge of the Marilyn Monroe situation. Most people do. She's so well known, right? But if he had, when the autopsy was performed by Dr. Noguchi and the results were released, and I suspect that Dr. Noguchi himself didn't quite agree with the official findings, then there would be a lot of question marks being raised about the legitimacy of the office, about the government, and about her background. So it's, well, she just died of a suicide, just like the Epstein. Well, the situation is different, but very similar to the Jeffrey Epstein situation. And I don't have to go over that again. I'm really rather tired of hearing all this repeated information on TubeView. Most of you know it. I'm just mentioning because it's analogous. So just declare her a suicide. Or in the case of Natalie Wood, who was a famous star. If you don't know, if you're a younger person, you might know who Natalie Wood is. In that case, I suggest you look her up on TubeView. TubeView is good for that. It's a repository for this type of visual information. All right, and I'm going to show you something in a little bit. Hang on. But if you were to declare this, as Noguchi did, as being accidental death, then you're going to avoid all the controversy that's going to embroil the whole Hollywood entertainment complex. Her husband at the time was Robert Wagner, who was a fairly well-known. I think he outranked her for a short time. Then she shot to the top. She eclipsed him. So that was maybe part of the tensions of this couple. But they were a Hollywood couple. They were a golden Hollywood couple. And on board was also Christopher Walken. I don't have to tell you who he is. He's still around. Right? But recently, there's been a move to reopen the case because there's no statute of limitations on murder, on homicide. And I'm not going to hazard a guess on what actually happened, but there are any number of books. I have a couple of them. Here's one. It's called Goodbye, Natalie. It's from the point of view of the skipper of the ship, the little boat. It was the boat that Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner owned. They loved to go to Santa Catalina, which is a island off of Los Angeles. It's in Los Angeles County, but it's about 20 miles away. They like to go out there And this raises certain questions. Her sister, Lana Wood, has some questions. The point is that, again, the coroner's office is a highly politically charged, motivated office. And Thomas Noguchi, MD, had to negotiate all that. In addition to the personal politics and animus that he was feeling breathing down his neck, people who wanted his job and move him out of the way for whatever reasons. I think one of the reasons, which Ann Soon Choi does not go through, because she's oblivious to any idea that there are larger, darker forces in operation in our society. She thinks this is just a story about some immigrant who worked his way to the top. This is like a Japanese Horatio Alger story. No, it's far more than that. Right. And by the way, I should mention, and for those of you who've been following me for the almost 5 years now, know that I've given talks on people like the coroner, the famous forensic pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's always been a ardent supporter of Noguchi. They're personal friends, professional colleagues, and professional. He's always supported him. I've also given talks on the so-called Manson family. Dr. Noguchi was involved in that. And just to show you, I got a new edition of this classic book by Ed Sanders. It's called The Family. This was the first major book on the so-called Manson family. And most of you know by now, if you've been watching alternative media, that the Manson family, so-called, was a intelligence construct, right? Which included a number of psychiatrists, most of whom you already know because you watched your pop-up pundits talk endlessly about them. Dr. Ewan, Cameron, blah, 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 right? And then Tom O'Neill wrote the book Chaos, which is excellent. I've given a talk on that. There's no mention of this by Ann Soon Choi. And of course, she puts a disclaimer, this is not a true crime book. Yeah, we weren't expecting that. But we weren't willing to sit, at least I'm not sitting through a whitewash of our contemporary politics. Forget the coroner stuff, forget the medical, forget Quincy, forget Thomas Noguchi. I'm talking about how this world operates on murders that are being committed in plain sight. Not too long ago, an individual by the name of Patrick Mastriciani, I think his name is. Let me make sure I give him due respect. I'm sorry, it's Matriciana. Patrick. He edited this book. It's called The Clinton Chronicles. I have a used copy of it, and it was later made into a videotape. It talks about the whole succession of mysterious deaths that are surrounding Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Let's take a quick look at this here. So again, hopefully you're getting it by now. Murder, death, the coroner's office is politicized from the get-go. And Thomas Noguchi didn't go along with the program. That's why they got rid of him. Now, they didn't kill him, but they fired him once. They had to reinstate him because of political pressures, but then they got rid of him a second time. Eventually, he had to leave his position, even though he said he was not going to ever retire. He took a job, I think, as a faculty member at the USC Medical Center. He did okay professionally, but he no longer had that highly visible and politically charged position as the chief medical examiner of the Los Angeles County. So let's take a look at the Clinton body count.
The popular term Clinton body count has been described as a list of Clinton associates who met their untimely death, some by orders from the Clintons themselves. Google has altered its search algorithm to prevent searches for Clinton body count from auto-completing. Just recently, the Twitter account @Robbie12692 released a thread called "The Clinton Body Count." The following are just some of the names on that list. We see the popularity of the Clinton brand being shunned by most Americans. Is this the final curtain call for the Clintons and their criminal cabal? The first major Clinton scandal was in the late 80s. While Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, there were allegations of a CIA-run operation out of Mena Regional Airport, where guns were allegedly...
Most of you know about this by now. At least you know the general contours of the Mena situation. That's just one of many. By the way, I forgot to mention, I just checked before I went on air here. I wanted to see how much this book is going for. Right, I have a first edition. It was published back in 1994. That's not that long ago. It's now going used for $40. I think I got it for like $2 used a number of years ago. I think you might be able to find some old VHS tapes of the Clinton Chronicles online. I would suggest you getting them. I'm just telling you this for the people who collect this material. When I bring it to you, it's probably going to go up in value. Right? If you're a collector, but it's not just the money issue. Okay, I need $30 on buying. I'm not going to sell it, but it's the availability of it is what I'm worried about, because this book is gone. It's going to be out of print once it's bought up. Right. So this is true, especially of books that are non-trade, that are non-New York publishing racket imprints. They don't last long on the market, brand new, or on the used market. So you want to snap them up quickly. Otherwise, it's going to be gone. Now, I will tell you, because part of this exercise here is to show you that the research goes on, and it goes on in a positive direction to the point where we're beginning to undermine this ideological infrastructure, which includes the justice system, the DOJ, right? All that stuff. Because you saw that clip right there. You saw Barack Hussein Obama's profile in there. You know that documents have been passed on to the Department of Justice to investigate his role in fabricating an entire treasonous, they use that word, treasonous attempt to take down the American government, the American presidency. Right? So this exercise that you can congratulate yourself, it's making some progress. And the wars are never won totally. There are stay-behind networks. Evil is always there. The Luciferians don't go away. Right? They're there as part of human society to test us and to make sure that we don't fall asleep. So they're not going to go away. Don't rest on your laurels, but it's happening. Just like the public reaction to the so-called Epstein files. I told you I wasn't going to mention it, but I have to. It's been overwhelmingly positive because people are alert now. They're following this and they're expressing their political will in a positive way. It's because of you and me. So here's another recommendation, if you like. It's called Behind the Death List. It's by, I don't know who Steve Preston is, but that doesn't matter. I don't do these books for promotional purposes. I bought the Ann Soon Choi book by my Patreon donations. I don't ask the publishers for free copies I pay for everything myself, thanks to the generosity of the patrons. So I paid for this. So just above board to let you know, there's no conflict of interest here. And it's a short book, but it's very incisive. This guy has cataloged just a smattering of killings that are attributable to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. So, and last I heard, they're still running around free. And here we're worrying about a guy who's supposedly dead or is living under an assumed identity somewhere where we'll never find him. Right. And who declared these people dead anyway? What are the circumstances? They were coroner medical examiners. The most notorious one in the state of Arkansas during the time that Bill Clinton was governor is a guy named by the name. His name is Malik, Dr. Fahmy Malik. I tried to find some material of him on him online. Most of it's been scrubbed. I can't find any YouTube on him. I used to see him all the time when all these controversies were swirling around. But that material has been taken away. That's why you have to buy the books. That's why if something comes out on YouTube, you have to have the software and to download the videos and keep it. Otherwise, it's going to disappear down the Orwellian memory hole. Or it could, not necessarily, but it might. So Dr. Fahmy Malik, he was criticized at the time for covering up all these murders that were surrounding this network around Little Rock, Arkansas, which I've been to, by the way. I did a cross-country drive, went through once, and I stopped at the State House to take a look at the Capitol. Clinton had been in the presidency, but I just wanted to kind of get a feel for the layout there. But when he was there, you know the story better than I do. Read the Clinton Chronicles. It's probably on YouTube, the video. Watch that, buy the books. You can also take a look at this one by William Turner. This is a reprint. William Turner, John Christian. It's called The Assassination of Robert Kennedy. Right. This is covered in the book here by Ann Soon Choi, but there's nothing about, and of course, Noguchi was the one who supervised the autopsy on Robert F. Kennedy. But she fails to go into the political implications of the assassination and who really is and was behind it. When I say is behind it, it's because some of these guys are still alive. They're still around. One of them is the Secretary of Health. Is that his proper title? I don't know what it is. It's RFK Jr., our man. He's followed the case closely. He's even gone so far as to interview Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, who's still behind bars, having been convicted of a crime that most likely he did not commit, according to people like Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who was overruled. You know that his role in that. It's kind of like a footnote. Noguchi's participation in the RFK assassination is kind of a footnote by all these people who've written about it. But he's a central figure in it. I'm foregrounding him. Just like he was pushed off to the side where Jack Klugman takes the role of Quincy medical examiner, and the second banana is Robert Ito. I'm not going to let Dr. Noguchi be pushed aside by history. He's right front row and center. And I mention that because there's all these little documentaries and films and even stage shows that are featuring Dr. Thomas Noguchi. They're making him into a pop culture parody, a figure. And that's not going to happen on my watch. This is part of my childhood, but it's part of my living memory. The assassination of RFK, of JFK, of MLK, This is all part of my childhood, ladies and gentlemen, right? I think it's normal to see political leaders being eliminated one by one in full view of the American public. It's not normal. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they did that, to MK us. Mind fug. MK, mind fug. By the way, Ed Sanders, who wrote the book, The Family, the first one on the so-called Manson family, he was in a group. They're a poet spoken word, I guess you could call it, called the Fugs, F-U-G-G-S. That's Ed Sanders. And I mentioned that because he, in his own right, is a really important writer who's been forgotten. He's been overlaid by all these pop-up pundits who couldn't write their way out of a paper bag, let alone doing this kind of meticulous research that Ed Sanders and others have done. I'm not going to include Vincent Bugliosi. I'll mention his name because some of you might say, oh yeah, I read the Bugliosi book, Helter Skelter, but he's a cover-up artist, right? This book's probably not intentionally a cover-up art job, but by implication it is, because it's overriding this real, actually existing conspiratorial history that's utterly absent in so-called Asian American studies. And it is because I think the Asian American studies, if at its founding, or certainly by now, was a creation of military intelligence services. These are all veterans that came back from World War II, came to the U.S., got their medical degrees, doctorates, went into academia, and they also worked for the intelligence agencies. And they saw that there was some groundswell of yellow people who wanted to assert themselves politically, just like Negroes or blacks or browns and Mexicans, and later women. So they set up academic programs to control it. It's a containment process. I use the same analogy, strategy of containment, when analyzing the Sean John Collins case. I said the trial was a containment exercise. Do you see how it operates? Criminality, crimes, murder themselves are contained. The first line of containment is that of the medical examiner, the coroner. That would be Dr. Thomas Noguchi. And he wouldn't go along with another guy who wouldn't go along with is Cyril Wecht, Dr. Cyril Wecht. And he himself was persecuted for his vocal opposition to the orthodoxy on all these autopsies, these suspicious deaths. This is Cyril Wecht. He's written several books himself. Read them. His contribution has been invaluable. He is a legend. He's an important, unlike most legends, he's for real. And he's written a couple of autobiographies. I've reviewed them on this channel. The powers that be later went into Dr. Cyril Wecht. They put him on trial. He beat them. I think he also has a law degree, but can you believe it? He studied in his part-time, precious little time he had, with, in addition to his coroner responsibility, he was studying law. He has a law degree. And he has a lot of chutzpah. Okay, that's something that the Japanese people, most Asians in general, lack. It comes from Yiddish. It's called chutzpah, and that's boldness, arrogance. It's assertiveness, and that's what screwed up Dr. Noguchi. Japanese has a concept called enryo. It's the diametrical opposite of chutzpah. You know what the example of chutzpah is? Chutzpah is a defendant on trial for murdering his parents, his mother and father, and he asks the judge for leniency because he's an orphan. That's chutzpah. Noguchi and most of your Asian people are afflicted with the Enryo syndrome. And that is, you don't cause any trouble. This is even in Japan. You don't raise your voice, you don't talk in public. That's why if you go to Tokyo that has 40 million people and it's really quiet, you don't hear any horns. You can get on a jam-packed subway, a train, and no one's on their phone. No one's dicking around unless it's somebody from America jerking around. Like Somali Dave. What's his name? He's a black guy. He called himself Somali. They kicked his ass out of Japan. So I'm just giving you a little bit of the sort of a cultural anthropological take here. Right. And I think so-called Asian American studies itself is inflicted by the Enryo syndrome. It lacks the audacity that's required to make it in this society, which is about brashness, talking loud, assertiveness, all of that. And that's not my nature either, by the way. I only became this way because I had to work in that type of environment. Academia is a shark tank. And if you do not step up to the chutzpah game, you're going to be rolled up real quick. All right. Because I was socialized to be a proper Oriental boy. Although my father didn't fit that. He was more like me. He was always in trouble too. All right. So let's continue. Since we're talking about yellow people who's been pushed to the side, to the margins, and made into like a pop culture caricature, Dr. Noguchi, by filmmakers and theatrical people, let's talk about the black man who was there trying to save the life of RFK. Did you know that there was a black man, a medical doctor who was involved in it? Here he is right here.
Chicago, and let's win there.
Minutes after Robert Kennedy's victory speech in the California primary, panic ripped through the hotel ballroom.
Is there a doctor in the house, please? It's very important.
5 doctors responded, including Dr. Ross Miller, who described the scene to CBS News correspondent Terry Drinkwater.
Can you describe the senator's wounds?
Well, they were a mass of blood, and he had head injuries. The extent of them could not be ascertained immediately.
Dr. Miller was my father. He had campaigned for Kennedy and always told us he was there that night, but we had no visual proof until we searched the CBS News archives earlier this year.
Was he fully conscious, doctor?
No.
Kennedy's friend Paul Schrade was also shot.
There's still a dent there. The bullet went into the first layer skull and out.
You're lucky.
Very lucky. If I'd been an inch taller, it really would have got me.
Dr. Marvin Ursher saw Schrade bleeding on the floor.
You check him. There's another doctor there.
Right.
Who was that doctor? Do you know?
I don't know.
It was just that chaotic.
Right.
So this is what we found in the CBS News archives.
How many others were hit, doctor?
I know of 2 others. I also took care of Paul Schrade.
Never knew.
He had a deep laceration of the forehead.
Paul, to see this and to see how he knew your name.
Yeah.
And he...
Well, this is a real surprise for me. How can I express my gratitude for that, except to say to you that you had a great father?
At the time, 2 publications mentioned my father's contributions, a cover story in Jet magazine and a photo caption in Life, but we couldn't find him in the picture. So we tracked down the man who took it, Bill Epridge.
Well, there's more to that story. I mean, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. I knew there was a black man. I didn't know his identity. I didn't know his Dr. Ross Miller. In preparation for this talk, I looked him up. There's nothing online. I'd like to read his biography. He's an important figure, not just because of his role in the RFK medical emergency. As you know, he died about an hour after he was taken into the hospital. But because of his role, the role of Black people in the civil rights movement who were backing RFK, your Mexicans, your Orientals, and your Negroes, this is what we were all called back then, were backing our man RFK, including my parents, because he was the representative. I know he's a flawed person. I know he was probably involved with Marilyn Monroe and his brother. I know that story as well as you do. But in addition to that, he was seen as being our representative. And Dr. Ross Miller was right there, and he's barely a footnote, whereas he's worthy. And he had a practice. I did find this online. He practiced. He was a surgeon too. His practice was based in Compton, California. This is a city in the county of Los Angeles. And you know Compton primarily because that's NWA. That's the land where rap came from. But no, in the 1950s through the 60s, before the rap plague, which is a intelligence operation itself, that's a mind fuck. Rap, hip hop, the whole pity ditty stuff. Before that, Compton was popular. Was people like Dr. Ross Miller lived in Compton. They lived next to people like me, like my family, under segregation. Do you understand? That was the community. That was the Black community. That was the African American community in Los Angeles and other parts of the country as well, but LA for sure. But that history's been wiped out, and it rolled in is all these characters who are twerking on air, right? And artificially being pumped up in these money laundering schemes. There's sort of like a self-licking ice cream cone that's the wet dream of the NSA and all these, the Office of Naval Intelligence, all these other organizations who are responsible for controlling the populations. Okay. As we wind down, let's take a look at
This is Channel 7's Eyewitness News with Judd Hambrick, John Schubeck, and the Eyewitness News team.
Good evening. I'm Judd Hambrick. Here's what's happening at 11 o'clock. The gunfire has stopped and the flames are out, but a big question mark still hangs over South Central Los Angeles at this very moment. A question as large and perhaps as tragic as any on the West Coast in the last 103 days. Is the body of Patty Hearst among the 5 found early tonight in a shot-up, burned-out home on 54th and Compton Avenues? A home that went up in unchecked flames as the climax of a shootout in which Los Angeles police fired more ammunition than they ever had fired before in a single law enforcement assault. Just who are the 5 persons killed? That still is not known. If any of them have been identified, it's not been officially disclosed. At Hillsborough, California, the Randolph Hearst family has apparently given in to the inevitable fear. A family spokesman said tonight that the feeling inside the Hearst home is that it's all over for Patty. Yet despite that atmosphere, the family spokesman added that the Hearsts still are clinging to some hope that their daughter was somewhere else, not in a stucco house at Compton and 54th Avenue here in Los Angeles. John, you have more.
Judd, we certainly do. We still have nothing official at this hour to say with certainty that the 5 persons who died in that shootout were actually members of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Dr. Thomas Noguchi is even now trying to identify the bodies, some of which were burned beyond recognition. But all night long there has been rumor and speculation about the names of the victims in that house. Among those believed slain on East 54th Street were the escaped convict Donald DeFries, known as Marshal Sin Q of the Symbionese Liberation Army. It was Sin Q whose voice, along with Patty Hearst, appeared on those recordings sent to the publisher Randolph Hearst. Also, Nancy Ling Perry, a former college cheerleader who once campaigned for Barry Goldwater and also worked for a time as a topless blackjack dealer. Kamala Hall, daughter of a Lutheran minister who once was involved in a career as a social worker in Minneapolis, and until she joined the SLA was known by her friends as an advocate of nonviolence. William Lawton Wolfe, son of a Pennsylvania doctor and dropout from the University of California in Berkeley. But we must emphasize all this is speculation, not based on anything official. 3 of the bodies were found underneath the floor.
Okay, here's John Schubeck. I remember him. I was in college when this went down. This is 1974. The shootout at the Fantasy Factory in Los Angeles. Read a little bit of material, look on TubeView if you want to get like an overview on the so-called Symbionese Liberation Army. They found 3 burnt bodies in this house in LA, in South Central LA, around where Compton is, along where Dr. Ross Miller was living. That's the same area. And Dr. Noguchi, who was mentioned in passing here, was charged with the responsibility of identifying these bodies that were burned severely. Because the LA, by the way, you know, SWAT, which is now everywhere in the country, U.S., special weapons, armed, tactical, all that, that was pioneered in Los Angeles, right, by Chief Daryl Gates. That's another story altogether. Right. And I think he and Dr. Noguchi were political enemies as well. But Dr. Noguchi was tasked with responsibility of trying to identify. They couldn't really make an immediate identification. And Patty Hearst, in case you don't know, is the great-great-granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst. He's the person that established a West Coast, primarily San Francisco, but also in LA and throughout the country, really. Publishing empire, Hearst paper is still, it's not owned by the family, the majority owners anymore, but they were important newspaper people. You control the media, you control the political situation. She was an heiress to that fortune, and she was studying at UC Berkeley. And she supposedly was kidnapped by this terrorist radical organization called the SLA, Symbionese Liberation Army, and they went on a cross-country jaunt. By the way, there was a Japanese-American woman named Wendy Yoshimura who entered the story. She was never formally an SLA member, but she was caught up in it too, into the radical politics at the time. She's from the Oakland area. One of my students interviewed her. She became a watercolor artist. This is Wendy Yoshimura. Right. So as it turned out, Patty Hearst was not killed in that shootout in LA. And later she turned up and she went on trial. You can look for more details on your own. In the interest of time, I can't really get into it. The point I wanted to make is, like the so-called Manson family, as was outlined in the book by Tom O'Neill, Chaos, the SLA was a synthetic construct. It didn't exist. They recruited some prisoners out of a Vacaville prison, the California State Prison, but not far from where I am here, Vacaville. This guy, Donald DeFreeze, otherwise known as Singhu, he was allowed to escape. Or on parole, like Manson. Charles Manson was on parole. He was always moving around supposedly under parole supervision. And they created this organization, the SLA, to justify the budgeting of police force like SWAT, like surveillance, right? Why is that relevant today? Because we're seeing the same process going on in 2025. Now, the question that remains is that, are we now going to be equally as gullible as the people in the pre-internet days, pre-TubeView, pre-socials, pre-TikTok? We don't have as much of an excuse today in 2025. In fact, we don't have any excuse because we've got tons of books, movies, documentaries to verify, to validate, to substantiate everything I've told you here in this talk. So again, it gets down to politics. Do we, you and me included, do we have the political will to say this is bullshit? Call bullshit on it, right? I don't care. It could be, everybody's talking about Epstein. That's just one case out of many, right? We can talk about the situation in Moscow, Idaho, which I will. I don't think it's simple as we've been led to believe by these books and reporters. And of course, the pop-up pundits are clueless. They're just allowed to run their mouths to flood the zone. So it's only through this sort of sustained work, research, that we're going to be able to disentangle the truth from the propaganda that's being put on us, for lack of a better word. MK, if you like. So I just found this on my shelf. A lot of these books that I showed you today, they're just part of my collection. I found this. This is published way back in 1974. This is before Ann Soon Choi was born. Her parents probably weren't even in the country yet. But this was published by a guy named Art Kunkin. He's another very important person in the history of American publishing. You've heard me name check Anna Wintour and complain from week to week. Oh, she's a British intelligence asset. She runs Condé Nast publication. She's the editor of Vanity Fair. She runs the New York Costume Museum Costume Ball, blah, blah, blah. She's the daughter of Charles Wintour back in London. You know, you've heard, and if finally she got fired, right? So you hear me talking about it. But there are other people who never are recognized for their contribution. One such person is a guy named Art Kunkin, who edited, I think he founded it, but he edited a newspaper, which I used to read as a teenager or as a kid, maybe. It's called the Los Angeles Free Press. But he was into this type of research a long time ago, right? And the people you see on Tubi will have you believe that they're making these original discoveries. No, that's the synthesis. That's Chat GPT or Grok from this type of material that's been fed into the machine, that's being spit out for them to feed to the general audience. And this is a special edition. I found this used. I can't remember how I obtained it. It's called Organized Crime Behind Nixon. Published in 1974. Great photos. Kennedy's, you name it. So if you want to study this seriously, go back to the earlier literature, because this stuff here and these documentaries, the new ones, and these films that are made on Noguchi, for example, they're beginning to erase the history. That's part of the structured forgetting process. It's intentional. There's not a drug or some sort of mind wipe or a Mandela effect that's being used to wipe the memory. It's just being done by authors, just routine stuff that just takes the edges off of subjects that are still sharp in the drawer that need further examination. All right. I'll refer you to another book. This is called RFK Must Die. This is by Robert Blair Kaiser. If you can find this book in print, I would recommend getting it, because this talks about the psychological conditioning of the so-called assassin, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, of Robert F. Kennedy. And I will end with a high note. if you buy a used copy, it's you never know what's going to happen. I have a paperback copy, but I wanted an older copy, a hardback copy. What I found is that it's inscribed by Robert Blair Kaiser himself. 1991. I think I got this on Jeff Bezos's.com company for cheap. It's hardback. And Robert Blair Kaiser himself signed it. Wow. Oh, but I forgot to mention, remember the man? He's older now. He passed away a few years ago. Schrade. Is it Robert Schrade? Can't remember. He was a UAW, United Auto Worker. He was a union official. Paul Schrade, the one who was treated by Dr. Ross Miller in the clip that I just showed you. I met him on the street. I met him in Berkeley. I was walking with a friend of mine who knew Paul Schrade. They're all leftists. They're all liberals, leftists. And I'm telling this because the left used to be heavily, they used to lead the way in conspiracy theory. And it was the right that tried to suppress it. Now it's the conservatives that are into conspiracy, and it's the left that's suppressing it. Anyway, he introduced me to Paul Schrade. I didn't know who he was. I mean, I'd heard his name, but I didn't know it was him, the Paul Schrade. He said, well, he was the one that was shot with Bobby Kennedy. I said, oh my gosh, I met history. I can tell you story upon story. That's what happens when you're a geezer. Just by being around, you're going to run into people. You don't, well, it's not accidental. You don't just run into people. You're in a position to meet certain individuals that you're meant to meet. And I was meant to meet you here on TubeView with all its flaws and my own. And I thank you for joining me today. I think I'll talk about John Gregory Dunn. Not John Gregory Dunn, Dominic. John Gregory Dunn is his younger brother who was a novelist. He's married to Joan Didion, who is a journalist. I found out through this book here that I'm reading on Dominic Dunn. She started as a film reviewer for Vanity Fair, one of these New York magazines, because she's connected by family. And her family, here's Joan Didion, who's a legend in American arts and letters. She's from the Sacramento area. Her family were elites who probably were anti-Chinaman, anti-Japanese, for all I know. And it turns out, sure enough, according to the Dominic Dunn book, she's a Republican. He was a Republican, even though Dominic Dunn is an Irishman who was discriminated against when he was growing up, even though his father was a surgeon and was fairly wealthy, he was Irish Catholic. So he always felt like a second-class citizen, right? You get that theme there. It's not just me. All these other people have a similar experience. Maybe you do too, in your background. Most of the supporters, I'm not even talking about the Japanese supporters, because Chinese weren't helping. Koreans, definitely. Filipino, forget. They don't care. Not for Noguchi. They just thought that was our problem, right? But the main supporters of Noguchi, they were all Jews, from Cyril Weck to his attorney. They were all Jews, and you know why? Because it's in the book here, the Choi book, and Sun Choi, and that's from my own observation as well. Is because they lived with Orientals in LA. Jews were excluded from living in the white neighborhoods, the Anglo-Saxon neighborhoods. So they had to live with the Mexicans, the blacks, and the Orientals, like our family, until the barriers were lifted in LA, the residential sector, which left the non-whites. Jews were reclassified, so they were able to move to the west side, where they established a very powerful political base, and a lot of them moved to the San Fernando Valley, right? So that's why this history, this lived experience, is important in the history, in the historical memory. especially in 2025, when there are these intelligence agencies, these MK organizations trying to divide all the different communities. It should be patently obvious to most thinking people what's going on here. It's the same operation, and we cannot maneuver it by study such as this. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. We're going to have a really good in-depth discussion of LA in the swinging 60s and 70s by looking at Dominic Dunn. And I will leave you with one tidbit. I shouldn't spoil it for you because someone who's watching my show, who does a YouTube true crime channel, is going to take this information and run with it and build a whole show around it. But in the book, I found out that Nancy Reagan, she was known as Nancy Davis back then. This is before she met Ronnie Reagan, as he was being eyed for a future political office, first governor of California, and then, of course, he wound up as president of the United States. And he was almost taken out by a assassin right on camera. But Nancy Davis, according to Dominic Dunn, just sort of matter-of-factly, the book is not salacious at all. It mentions that she had no problems. She wasn't a great actress, and she was no great beauty, as opposed to someone like Maureen O'Hara or Lana Turner or Ava Gardner. She was okay. She was decent. But she could never fail to get a job because, let's just put it this way, she had superior oral skills. So on that low note that helped Ronald Reagan get to the heights of American politics, just like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and every other president who's ever had a blowjob, we'll end it today, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you next Sunday, God willing. Peace.